To Homes, Land, and You. I'm Kathy Hassenjager, and our show today is called Installation 101. And we have with us two guests from Quality Installation who are going to discuss with us everything you need to know about this. Luke Benson, who's the Regional Manager with Quality, and Michelle Medina, who is a local sales representative. Thank you for joining us. I try to shake hands, but we're a little far apart.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Particularly at this time of the year, we're in the wintertime, and fuel is getting very expensive for people, obviously. So you hear people talking more about what can I do to insulate my house, and obviously you need a whole overall approach rather than just a simple fix. Although sometimes things can be corrected in little ways to help that. But maybe you'd like to talk about like the different types of insulation, or maybe start with like if a new home were being built, what types of insulation would go into that? Do people have choices, or is it controlled by code? I know Massachusetts has a strong code right now.
There is code. As far as a standard, there really isn't one. It's driven mostly by what's called the res check. When you're going to build a new house, you have to pull the permits, of course, and you have to provide the res check, which pretty much takes everything that's going into the house, your windows, your doors, your HVAC system. It considers all of that, and it computes the R values that will be required per your climate zone. So you have to have that to start with, and that pretty much helps determine what your R values are going to be. So to say there's a standard code isn't really right. It's basically what's going to be best for your house depending on what you're putting in there as a system.
Now, who actually determines that at, the town hall? Is it computerized?
It's the IECC runs the res check.
What does that stand for?
There's International Energy Code Compliance. And it's basically the book, in a sense. You have to meet the codes by the book, but you have these guidelines to put those R values in place.
So the builder would get that from?
Either your builder has the res check done, sometimes the lumber companies do them. We can provide those as well. We are part of that program, and we have the systems in-house. So if you had a set of plans and you wanted to know what's going to be required, you simply give us the plans. We can get all of the information off of that, and we put it all into the system, and it helps us determine what would be the best solution for your house.
I know most people, when they think about insulation, they think of the typical pink bats that go in.
Right.
So is that the only type that would be going to new construction, or?
There's a wide variety of products, certainly, and as Michelle alluded to, it's particular to each house, each application, and cost, right? There's going to be all kinds of different variables that are going to be selected. At the end result on a new construction house is we're going to need to get to a certain level, right? A certain R value. Insulation is measured in R value. Higher the number, the more effective the insulation is. Different products have different attributes. For instance, foam. Polyurethane spray foam comes in half pound and 3/4 pound and 2 pound foams.
Excuse me. Where would people put that into the house? Where would that be?
Sure. In specific areas, right? And in new construction, it can be applied in the rafters. If there's board down, it can go. If there's drywall in, it can actually go on be applied to the drywall. It can go on the exterior walls. It can go in the basement ceiling. It can go in the basement rim joist or band joist, the perimeter that sits on the foundation. It's going to again depend on the application and depend on the decision of what product to use by really the builder, because there's no product code, right? Nobody says that you need to use a certain product. It's just how do you get to the certain R value and what attributes that the builder is trying to gain. I mean, foam, for example, has after 1.5 to 2 inches, the vendor states that there is no dew point, right? So you really eliminate some moisture issues. It's got air sealing attributes. It's got a higher R value per inch than, it's among the highest R values per inch that you can gain. And it also increases structural rigidity and rack and shear strength of the house with a 2 pound foam.
It's interesting because it's made me think of way back when they had UV, the formaldehyde. I mean, it was a great
Right.
insulator. It just had the negative properties with
Exactly.
it, but it did,
Yeah.
fill in. Of course, over time it started to shrink. But I mean, the idea was the same. But it's great if they have this newer one now that works.
Well, and that's a great
Absolutely.
point. No, but that's a great point.
Yeah.
But there are some I'm not going to say downsides, but there are some things that you need to be aware of.
Right.
When you're applying foam, whether it's new construction or if it's an existing structure that's being applied to, you need to. Well, I should say, quality installations policy is. All people need to have evacuated the building for 24 hours to allow for all off-gassing from the application to exit the house. And also to make so we're ensuring safety of anybody who comes in contact with it. That's our policy. Now that policy comes from our corporation, but it's also from the
vendor.
The vendor states that that's what needs to happen.
So if
When
people
I-
are thinking about doing this on their own, they need to pay attention to
Right.
what
Certainly.
it says on there.
Absolutely.
Well, and just be aware, if there's information being given, from elsewhere that says that's not necessary. We don't do this to make sure that we're not trying to make things difficult for our customers by any means. This is a serious, issue that needs to be, addressed and needs to be paid attention to because it could, in fact, cause harm, to people, and we certainly don't want that for all
Right.
parties involved.
Nobody wants to have to evacuate their house, especially if it's an existing home. If they're interested in foam, it's because they've realized it's the product for them. It's going to get them the application and the results that they want. But part of that process is evacuating the home.
You kind of look
And
at it
it's
like a little
safety.
mini vacation maybe for a
Right.
day or whatever, right? It's kind of
But
like
it
if
does
you
disturb your life, especially if you're trying to do an application during the week. Kids may be going to school and things like that. So we're very accommodating and do the best we can to meet people's schedules because of these guidelines.
Right. No, so maybe as far as people watching who are in their home already, it's winter, things are colder, fuel is expensive. I know you have some different things here. What types of things could people be looking at that might help them with their insulation?
Sure. Yeah. So, getting back to what we're talking about, codes. Really, codes are designed to make sure that there are energy savings, right, or good return on investment, and but also they take a look at climates, right, and how a house should be built from the start, right. So there really aren't any codes for existing construction, but
Right.
they have them on the residential new construction because you try to build the house the right way the first time. Be able to save people money, help the environment, right, reduce carbon emissions, and reduce carbon footprint, per home. So there aren't any codes on existing homes.
But where would
Per se.
where would people focus? Where,
Right.
where can I save some money here?
So what we would do, what we like to do though, is we like to measure up how the existing home is compared to code, right?
Right.
And so in existing homes that the Department of Energy recommends in this area, so in Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Maine, in this climate, they recommend between an R49 and an R60 in an attic. Okay.
in an attic.
In an attic,
the attic,
exactly.
yeah.
And how does that translate? So I brought with me some cellulose. This is cellulose that right now we have. This is 13 inches of loose fill cellulose.
Excuse me one second. So the cellulose is actually what kind of material for the folks watching?
Sure, it's a paper-based product, most recycled product, which does have some bonding chemicals in it, right? But it is considered one of the greener insulating products for attic insulation.
And they pour that, they blow it. What do they do?
Yep, this is exactly. It's a blown material. Can be blown in over any existing material, assuming that there aren't any hazardous materials already present. Say vermiculite, which may contain asbestos. I'm sure a lot of people have heard of that word, and nobody
Nobody
likes
probably
that
knows
word.
it's connected to vermiculite, though. I
Yeah.
didn't know that.
Right.
Well, it can be. Not
It
to say,
can
I'm not
be.
trying to scare anybody.
Right.
It can be. So
Yeah.
what happens is if we come out to a home and we do see that vermiculite is present, whether it's on the top layer, middle layer, or lower layer, because again, we get into a lot of these existing homes, there's multiple layers of insulation already in there. There's been improvements made
Over
the
time,
years.
people trying to
Exactly.
make it a little better,
Basically.
right?
Well, Makelite tends to look like a popcorn type of material.
Right.
We suggest you don't touch it. You know, you just stay away from it. If you have it, call somebody in there. We can take samples of it. Not we, excuse me, but you can have abatement companies come and take samples of it. They'll take a couple different samples because maybe asbestos might not be maybe present in one area but not another, and be able to test it, see if asbestos is present. If it's not present, we can blow, you know, either fiberglass or cellulose over. I brought in cellulose, like I said, because to show you the levels of what you should look for in your attic. I mean, 13 inches is really the minimum that the DOE is recommending. All right, because they recommend 13 to 60. 60, as you saw, is flagged right there as an R60. This is your 16 inches. So if you don't have this much in here, if you go up in your attic and you don't have this much insulation up there, you may want to give a call because the energy savings that you will receive from adding enough insulation to get you up to an R49, the returns are great. There's really no other place in the house that the returns can be the greatest besides insulating and air sealing the attic.
So sometimes you'll go in an attic and you'll see insulation. I mean, there's not a floor.
Yeah.
But say in an older house where there is a floor, so you kind of have to try to look under there and see what's there.
Right.
You blow it in underneath there
If
and try to fill
in,
that? Or?
if it's in a design where it's the old boards that are kind of wide and you can pop them up, we can do an application where we pop up every so many and we stick the hose in there and dense pack it in that way. Sometimes people aren't too concerned about what the wood's going to be afterwards because it's simply either a storage space or just an attic space, so we can drill right through that and blow it in that way as well. So either way, if you have a wide open attic with nothing floored over, we can do the application in that way. But we can also dense pack it in there, and depending on what your joists are,
Right.
we can get
so
it
say you have an
specified
older
already.
home and you're looking to, sometimes in the older homes they'll look to finish like a third floor for a playroom or an extra bedroom or whatever, and maybe there's some insulation in the floor already, not a whole lot, but now you're going to go to the third floor.
Right.
So in that case you'd be looking to do against
rafters.
the rafters, right?
Right.
And so what type of material would you do that with?
We use the same material. Again, whether it be fiberglass or cellulose, because now you're talking about the slopes or the
Right.
rafters, right? If it's already been sheetrocked, we have a couple different application methods. We can, if we have access to the attic flat, that little space above, and we can
Yeah.
get somebody in there, then we can blow down the sides, right? And then if we have, there tends to be knee walls in a third floor. If we can get behind the knee walls, we can blow up the slopes that way. We wouldn't have to disturb any of the inside.
Right.
So it hadn't been boarded yet. Do you ever do bats there, or that's recommended to do the
We
blowing
can,
better?
as long as the framing will allow the required R value. Again, you're going to have to get that res check that is going to tell you exactly what your R values need to be. So if your existing rafters aren't big enough, if you only have a 2x6, the largest bat, the highest R value bat you can fit in there is an R21.
Oh,
And
that's
a lot of the
interesting.
time, they're going to say, no, we want R30 or R38. So you're going from only 5 2/4 inches that you have in the space, where you need either 9 1/4 inches, or to fit the R38, you need 10 1/4 inches.
So with an existing home, and with our example, I'm going to finish up there, the contractor pulls a permit. So this same process has to be done as if it were a new home as far as the code.
As far as the code, there are standards in the book that will tell you what you need to meet. A lot of times I quote, there's actually a house in Walpole that I've quoted, and they're finishing off a third floor. And I had to quote it to the specs, and he had to bring that to the town and say,